Imagine watching waves at the shore, each one rising, cresting, and returning to the sea. Now imagine your life having this same natural rhythm, where every high tide of energy is followed by necessary rest. Every period of clarity makes way for integration. What if understanding this cosmic dance could transform how you experience life itself? Have you ever noticed that life seems to move in waves? Moments of brilliant clarity followed by confusion, periods of energetic productivity followed by exhaustion, seasons of connection followed by solitude. Well, what if these apparent inconsistencies weren't random failures, but part of a deeper pattern, a cosmic dance of rhythm that, once understood, could transform your relationship with life itself? Today, I'm offering you something transformative, a practical framework for developing rhythmic resilience, your ability to recognize life's natural cycles and align with them rather than resist them. This will transform struggles into flow, reduce unnecessary suffering, and increase your effectiveness across every domain of life. Take a moment and consider a current challenge you're facing. Perhaps it's creative work that feels stagnant, a relationship that seems to have lost its spark, or a spiritual practice that no longer yields the same insights. What if this state isn't a permanent condition, but simply one phase in a natural cycle that's already moving toward its opposite? Throughout human history, wisdom traditions have recognized this fundamental pattern of oscillation. The ancient Hermetic texts described it as the principle of rhythm. Everything flows out and in. Everything has its tides. All things rise and fall. In Taoist philosophy, we find the dance of yin and yang, constantly flowing into one another. Indigenous cultures worldwide structured their entire societies around seasonal rhythms and celestial cycles. And today, modern science confirms these insights through discoveries about our circadian rhythms, ultradian cycles, and the wave-like nature of reality at quantum levels. What's remarkable is that these perspectives, spanning thousands of years and diverse cultures, converge on a single truth. Rhythm isn't just a philosophical concept. It's the very pattern of existence itself. Take a moment right now to identify one area of your life where you feel like you're swimming upstream. Just bring it to mind. We'll return to this example throughout our journey toward rhythmic resilience, transforming your approach to this specific challenge. Yet despite this universal understanding, many of us live as though stability means unchanging constancy. We expect linear progress in our growth. We demand consistent productivity in our work. We seek steady states in our relationships. When the inevitable fluctuations come, as they must, we experience them as failures or problems to be fixed, rather than natural phases to be navigated. This misalignment between nature's rhythmic reality and our expectations creates unnecessary suffering. We resist the natural ebb when we should be resting. We push against creative drought when we should be gathering inspiration. We fight emotional withdrawal when we should be honoring the need for inner processing. Today, I want to offer you a different path, a way of being that doesn't fight against life's fluctuations but flows with them. By understanding and aligning with the principle of rhythm, we can develop a rare form of resilience that transforms our relationship with change itself. This isn't about passive acceptance, but about strategic alignment, knowing when to act and when to wait, when to expand and when to contract, when to express and when to reflect. This rhythmic resilience is perhaps the most practical wisdom the cosmos has to offer us, a way of moving through life with greater ease, effectiveness, and harmony. In the next few minutes, we'll explore both the timeless understanding of rhythm and specific practices for applying it to your daily challenges, culminating in a framework you can begin using immediately. Now that we've established what's possible with rhythmic resilience, let's build the foundation for this transformative practice by understanding rhythm's fundamental nature. To fully grasp the transformative potential of rhythmic awareness, we need to understand its foundations across different traditions and contexts. The Hermetic text, known as the Kybalion, articulates this universal principle elegantly. Everything flows, out and in. Everything has its tides. All things rise and fall. The pendulum swing manifests in everything. The measure of the swing to the right is the measure of the swing to the left. Rhythm compensates. This last phrase, rhythm compensates, contains a profound truth often overlooked in our understanding. It suggests that the intensity of movement in one direction determines the intensity of the return. Consider the ocean's waves. The higher they crest, the deeper they must trough. This pulsing pattern isn't merely poetic language, but a description of energy's fundamental behavior throughout the cosmos. Consider your own experiences. Periods of intense creative output are naturally followed by creative quiet. Deep emotional connections create a natural need for solitude. Intense physical exertion requires proportional recovery. This isn't coincidence, but the law of rhythmic compensation at work. Let me share a brief story that illustrates this principle in action. A friend of mine, Sarah, experienced an intense period of creative productivity while working on her novel, writing sometimes 12 hours a day for weeks. When this phase suddenly ended, she panicked, believing she'd lost her inspiration permanently. What she eventually realized was that the intensity of her creative output had necessitated an equally intense period of renewal. Once she stopped fighting this natural compensation and instead used the fallow period for reading, experiencing life, and refilling her creative well, her writing returned, not despite the break, but because of it. Consider how even your digital behavior follows cyclical patterns. Your smartphone probably tracks when you're most likely to check it, when you're most responsive to notifications, when you're typically asleep versus awake. These aren't just ancient ideas, but modern realities that tech companies often understand better than we understand ourselves. Recent neuroscience research shows that our brains literally function differently when we're aware of rhythmic patterns versus when we perceive events as random. When we recognize rhythm, we engage more of our prefrontal cortex, the region associated with planning and wise response, rather than activating our amygdala's stress response. This means rhythmic awareness isn't just philosophical, it physically changes how our brains process challenges. Yet despite this overwhelming evidence of rhythm's fundamental nature, 3 common misconceptions keep us from harnessing its wisdom. First is the misconception that stability means unchanging constancy. We've been conditioned to value consistency above all else. Steady productivity, unwavering moods, constant growth. But true stability isn't rigid fixedness, it's balanced oscillation around a center. Like a tightrope walker making small adjustments to maintain balance, our lives achieve stability through small, rhythmic movements, not through rigid immobility. The second misconception is that personal growth is linear rather than cyclical. We expect continuous improvement, viewing any regression as failure. Yet meaningful development rarely follows a straight line. Instead, it spirals, revisiting similar themes at deeper levels. What appears as regression is often preparation for advancement, as we integrate lessons before moving forward. The third and perhaps most damaging misconception is that negative phases, periods of rest, introspection, uncertainty, or dissolution, are failures rather than necessary counterparts to their positive opposites. Just as inhalation makes no sense without exhalation, periods of expansion require corresponding phases of contraction to be sustainable. Which of these 3 misconceptions resonates most strongly with your experience? The belief that stability means unchanging constancy, that growth should be linear, or that negative phases represent failure? Understanding your personal pattern of resistance is the first step toward transformation. These misconceptions don't just represent theoretical errors, they create practical suffering in our lives. When we fight against natural rhythms rather than flowing with them, we exhaust ourselves unnecessarily. We push when we should rest, cling when we should release, and resist when we should yield. At the heart of these patterns lies what I call the law of rhythmic compensation, the understanding that every phase contains the seeds of its opposite and will inevitably move toward it. This isn't fatalism but physics, not mysticism but mathematics. It's the recognition that energy naturally seeks balance through oscillation. This law is perhaps your first powerful tool for developing rhythmic resilience. The recognition that whatever state you're in right now, no matter how permanent it feels, is already beginning its movement toward its opposite. This single insight can transform your relationship with life's challenges. Now that we understand rhythm's universal presence, let's explore how this awareness gives you two powerful tools that together create true resilience: the ability to both see patterns and navigate them skillfully. Now that we've established the foundational understanding of rhythm as a universal principle, let's explore two transformative insights that can fundamentally alter how you navigate life's inevitable fluctuations. The first insight I invite you to consider is what I call the pattern recognition perspective, a way of perceiving reality that recognizes rhythmic patterns operating simultaneously across multiple scales of existence. Consider for a moment the extraordinary range of oscillations happening right now. At the cosmic scale, galaxies spiral in vast rotational patterns. Our solar system follows its orbital rhythm around the galactic center. Our planet cycles through its yearly seasons and daily rotations. Within your body, your heart beats in its steady rhythm. Your lungs expand and contract, and at the cellular level, countless biochemical cycles maintain your existence. At the quantum level, energy itself manifests as wave patterns. This isn't merely an interesting observation, it's a profound revelation about the nature of reality. The ancient Hermetic axiom, as above, so below, points to this fundamental truth. The patterns that govern the cosmos are reflected at every scale of existence. This isn't mystical speculation, but observable reality, confirmed by both contemplative traditions and modern science. Let me share how this perspective transformed one person's experience. Michael, a business executive, struggled with debilitating anxiety around decision-making. Every choice felt permanent and potentially catastrophic. Through developing pattern recognition, he began to see how his business experienced natural cycles of expansion and contraction. Rather than seeing downturns as permanent failures, he recognized them as phases in a larger pattern. This awareness didn't eliminate challenges, but it transformed his relationship to them, reducing his anxiety and allowing more strategic responses rather than panic-driven reactions. What happens when we begin to perceive these interconnected rhythms? Something remarkable shifts in our consciousness. We start to recognize that we're not separate from these patterns, but embedded within them, participating in a cosmic choreography that extends far beyond our individual lives. This perspective transforms how we interpret our experiences, the changes we undergo, from emotional fluctuations to creative cycles, from periods of spiritual insight to times of questioning, are no longer isolated events, but reflections of larger rhythmic principles. We begin to see our personal patterns in a cosmic context. Developing this pattern recognition becomes a spiritual practice in itself, a form of awareness that transcends ordinary perception. Instead of seeing disconnected events, we perceive interconnected cycles. Instead of experiencing time as merely linear, we recognize its circular qualities. Instead of fighting against changes, we learn to dance with them. Let's practice this perspective right now. I invite you to pause the video for a moment and identify 3 distinct rhythms currently operating in your life. One physical, one emotional, and one creative or spiritual. Notice where each of these rhythms currently sits in its cycle. Is your physical energy waxing or waning? Is your emotional landscape expanding or contracting? Is your creative or spiritual life in a phase of expression or gestation? As you identify these rhythms, also notice which ones do you tend to fight against? Which do you flow with naturally? This awareness itself begins the shift toward greater resilience. This simple practice of rhythmic awareness already begins to shift how you relate to your experiences. Rather than judging these states as good or bad, you can recognize them as natural phases in ongoing cycles. This perspective alone can alleviate suffering by removing the layer of judgment we often add to our experiences. While pattern recognition gives you the awareness to see life's rhythms, our second insight, strategic surrender, gives you the practical wisdom to navigate them effectively. These two capabilities work together to create true resilience. Once we recognize the rhythmic patterns operating in our lives, we face a crucial choice. Will we resist these natural flows or align with them? Resistance might seem like the courageous choice, fighting against fatigue, pushing through creative blocks, forcing emotional availability when we need solitude. Our culture often celebrates this kind of persistence. Yet what if true wisdom lies not in constant pushing, but in knowing when to push and when to yield? What if effectiveness comes not from fighting natural rhythms, but from strategic alignment with them? Consider how Olympic athletes don't train at maximum intensity every day. They carefully orchestrate periods of intensity and recovery, knowing that growth happens during rest, not just effort. Their gold medals aren't won despite this rhythmic approach, but because of it. This isn't surrender, but strategic wisdom that produces exceptional results. Consider how a skilled sailor navigates the ocean. They don't fight against the tides or attempt to sail directly into headwinds. Instead, they read the patterns of water and wind, adjusting their approach accordingly. Sometimes this means riding a favorable current. Other times, it means anchoring until conditions change. This isn't passive resignation, but strategic navigation, using natural forces rather than exhausting energy fighting against them. The same wisdom applies to navigating life's rhythms. When we're in an energetic phase, we can channel that energy into creative expression or active pursuits. When we enter a reflective phase, we can honor the need for integration and renewal. When our emotional landscape contracts, we can use that time for self-examination rather than forcing outward connection. This approach fundamentally transforms our relationship with life's challenges. A creative block becomes not a failure, but a necessary gathering phase before new expression. Physical fatigue becomes not a weakness, but a signal to honor the body's need for recovery. Emotional withdrawal becomes not a problem, but a natural movement toward inner processing. Let me offer some practical examples of how this rhythmic navigation might look in daily life. In your creative work, notice the natural oscillation between periods of inspiration and execution versus periods of incubation and input. Instead of forcing productivity during fallow times, use these phases for research, experimentation, or simply allowing your subconscious to work. When inspiration flows, ride that wave fully. In relationships, recognize the natural ebb and flow between connection and autonomy. All healthy relationships breathe, moving between times of intense togetherness and periods of individual space. Rather than interpreting distance as rejection, you might see it as a necessary phase that will naturally return to connection. In your spiritual or contemplative practice, observe how clarity and confusion often alternate. Rather than clinging to peak experiences or despairing during dry spells, recognize both as necessary parts of a deeper process of growth. Think specifically about your answer to our opening question, the area where you feel like you're swimming upstream. What would strategic surrender look like in that situation? Not giving up, but aligning differently with the current. I invite you to consider, where in your life might you be exhausting yourself by swimming against a natural current rather than navigating its flow? What struggle might transform if you approached it as a phase to be navigated rather than a problem to be solved? The dance between these two insights, pattern recognition and strategic navigation, creates what I call rhythmic resilience. It's an approach that honors both cosmic patterns and personal agency, both acceptance and action. Rather than diminishing our capacity for choice, this understanding enhances it by aligning our efforts with natural forces. Remember what we discovered in our first section, that the law of rhythmic compensation shows us that every phase already contains the seeds of its opposite. This understanding directly transforms your strategic approach to pattern recognition, knowing that what you're experiencing now is already beginning its movement towards something different. Throughout history, those who mastered rhythmic wisdom, like Gandhi's strategic timing of political action, or artists like Da Vinci who honored creative cycles, demonstrated that effectiveness comes not from constant pushing, but from aligning with natural timing. This integration of agency and acceptance isn't just philosophical, it's profoundly practical. It allows us to invest our energy wisely, to recognize when effort will bear fruit and when patience serves us better. It teaches us to dance with life rather than struggling against it, to move with grace rather than force. We've now explored both the pattern recognition perspective and strategic navigation, two key insights that form the foundation of rhythmic resilience. Next, we'll explore how these insights transform not just our outer actions, but our inner relationship with experience itself. Now that we've explored the pattern recognition perspective and rhythmic navigation, let's bridge these insights to the personal transformation they make possible, the development of true rhythmic resilience. What makes rhythmic awareness truly transformative is the meta-perspective it offers, the ability to see your immediate experience within larger patterns, like gaining elevation over a landscape. This perspective doesn't eliminate life's challenges, but it fundamentally transforms our relationship to them. Consider how differently we experience a difficult phase when we view it as temporary rather than permanent, as meaningful rather than random, as part of a larger pattern rather than an isolated event. This shift in perception doesn't just change our thoughts, it alters our emotional and physiological responses. When we understand that every phase contains the seeds of its opposite, something profound happens. We can honor the present moment while holding awareness of its impermanence. We can fully experience winter while knowing spring is already gestating within it. We can navigate darkness with the quiet confidence that light will return, not as wishful thinking, but as recognition of a fundamental principle of existence. This meta-awareness creates a unique form of resilience, not through denial or detachment, but through expanded perspective. It's like gaining elevation on a landscape. Suddenly, what appeared as overwhelming obstacles becomes part of a larger topography that includes both valleys and peaks. This perspective isn't merely philosophical, it's neurologically transformative. Research in contemplative neuroscience shows that when we view challenges through this wider lens, we shift from reactive brain networks centered in the amygdala to more responsive ones in the prefrontal cortex. This literally changes our nervous system's response to difficulty, reducing stress hormones and creating greater capacity for wise action rather than automatic reaction. Moreover, this rhythmic foreknowledge allows us to prepare for natural transitions rather than being blindsided by them. Just as farmers prepare for winter during autumn's abundance, we can use awareness of rhythmic patterns to anticipate and prepare for changes in our inner and outer landscapes. This transformative perspective applies across all dimensions of human experience. Let's explore how rhythmic awareness creates resilience in several key life domains. In creative work, understanding rhythmic patterns transforms how we relate to inspiration and its apparent absence. All creative people experience oscillation between periods of flow and periods of drought. When we resist the following phases, we experience them as blocks or failures. But when we understand them as necessary periods of gathering and gestation, we can use them purposefully for research, experimentation, or simply allowing our subconscious to work. The drought itself becomes part of the creative process rather than an interruption of it. Let me share the experience of James, a writer who struggled with what he called creative drought. After 6 successful books, he suddenly couldn't write. For months he forced himself to sit at his desk daily, producing nothing but anxiety. When he finally embraced rhythmic understanding, he stopped forcing productivity and instead used this time to travel, read widely, and reconnect with his curiosity. What he originally saw as failure, he came to recognize as a necessary gathering phase. The book that eventually emerged was his most successful work, not despite the drought, but because of how he used it as part of his creative rhythm. Consider how differently you might approach a creative project when viewing it rhythmically. Instead of forcing continuous progress, you might intentionally alternate between periods of active development and periods of stepping back, allowing ideas to germinate during apparent inactivity, knowing this rhythm produces better results than constant pushing. Remember our misconception about stability requiring unchanging constancy. Nowhere is this more apparent than in creative work, where we often expect consistent inspiration and output. What if true creative stability isn't constant production, but a balanced rhythm of expression and reception, output and input? In relationships, rhythmic understanding transforms how we interpret connection and distance. All meaningful relationships, whether romantic, familial, or friendship, breathe in their own rhythm, moving between periods of intense connection and periods of more individual focus. Without rhythmic awareness, we often misinterpret these natural fluctuations, seeing distance as rejection or taking connection for granted. When we recognize these patterns, however, we can honor both phases. We can fully engage during periods of connection while respecting the need for space. We can experience separation without catastrophizing it, knowing that cycles of reconnection will naturally follow. This awareness creates relationships with both deeper intimacy and healthier autonomy. In career development, rhythmic understanding reveals the natural alternation between periods of learning and periods of expression, between times of focused advancement and times of integration and consolidation. Rather than expecting constant upward momentum, we can recognize seasons of preparation and seasons of manifestation, times to gain skill and times to apply it. This perspective is particularly valuable in our achievement-oriented culture, where worth is often tied to continuous advancement. Recognizing career rhythms allows us to honor necessary plateaus as times of integration rather than stagnation. It helps us discern when to push forward and when to consolidate gains before the next advance. In spiritual growth, perhaps more than any other domain, rhythmic awareness transforms our journey. Across contemplative traditions, we find descriptions of oscillation between clarity and confusion, between meaningful connection and apparent absence, between insight and integration. The dark night of the soul, described by mystics, isn't a failure of practice, but a necessary phase of deeper growth. When we understand these spiritual rhythms, we neither cling to peak experiences nor despair during dry periods. We recognize that clarity often precedes confusion as we integrate insights at deeper levels. We understand that periods of apparent regression often prepare us for new advancement. This rhythmic perspective creates a spiritual resilience that remains steady amid the inevitable fluctuations of the inner journey. Despite its transformative potential, rhythmic wisdom often meets resistance, both from our individual conditioning and from broader cultural pressures. Let's address these forms of resistance directly. Many of us fear that acknowledging rhythmic patterns means surrendering control or agency. If life moves in cycles partly beyond our direction, what happens to our sense of self-determination? This concern reflects a fundamental misconception about the relationship between pattern and choice. Recognizing rhythm doesn't diminish our agency. It enhances it by allowing us to align our choices with natural forces rather than wastefully opposing them. Consider again the sailing metaphor. A skilled sailor doesn't have less control than one who fights against wind and tide. They have more effective influence precisely because they work with rather than against natural patterns. Similarly, rhythmic awareness doesn't reduce our choices, but makes them more effective by teaching us when and how to apply our efforts. Our culture also creates resistance through its emphasis on continuous productivity, linear progress, and constant availability. The tyranny of always on leaves little room for natural cycles of engagement and withdrawal, expression and reflection. We're expected to maintain consistent output regardless of our internal state, an expectation fundamentally at odds with rhythmic reality. This cultural pressure manifests in phenomena like hustle culture and burnout epidemics. When we believe we should always be productive, always growing, always available, we violate the rhythmic nature of our bodies and minds. Studies show that productivity actually decreases under constant pressure, while strategic alternation between focus and rest produces better results. Rhythmic wisdom isn't just spiritually sound, it's pragmatically superior. By developing rhythmic resilience, you gain freedom from these cultural pressures, the capacity to honor necessary rest without guilt, to trust fallow periods as productive, and to move with rather than against your natural cycles even when external demands suggest otherwise. Perhaps the most profound paradox of rhythmic wisdom is that we gain greater influence by accepting natural limitations. By aligning with rather than fighting against fundamental patterns, we access a form of flow that accomplishes more with less struggle. We discover the freedom that comes not from unlimited options, but from wise navigation within natural contours. I invite you to reflect on a recent struggle in your life. How might viewing it as one phase of a natural rhythm change your relationship to that experience? What if the challenge isn't a permanent state, but a temporary phase in a larger cycle? What might change in how you respond to it? You'll know you're developing rhythmic resilience when you catch yourself saying, "This too shall pass," not as wishful thinking, but as recognition of a fundamental pattern you've observed repeatedly in your life, a knowing that comes from experience rather than mere hope. This transformative perspective doesn't eliminate life's difficulties, but it fundamentally alters how we experience them. It offers a practical wisdom that creates resilience not through denial or detachment, but through expanded awareness. The recognition that we're participating in patterns far larger than our individual concerns, yet intimately connected to our personal journey. We've now explored how rhythmic understanding transforms our relationship with life's challenges. In our next section, we'll move from understanding to practice, exploring specific tools for developing rhythmic resilience in your daily life. Understanding rhythm at a conceptual level is only the beginning. True transformation comes when we integrate this awareness into our daily lives through consistent practice. Before we explore specific practices, I'm curious. What's been your most significant insight so far about rhythm in your life? Take a moment to identify one realization that feels particularly relevant to your journey. Let me share with you what I call the Rhythmic Resilience Framework. 3 interconnected practices that will help you develop mastery in dancing with life's natural cycles. The framework consists of 3 interconnected practices: rhythm mapping to identify your personal patterns, pendulum preparation to anticipate natural transitions, and rhythmic alignment to match activities with your energy states. The first practice is rhythm mapping, the process of identifying and tracking your personal rhythms across different domains of life. Just as each person has a unique fingerprint, we each have distinctive rhythmic patterns that, once recognized, become invaluable navigational tools. Begin by observing cycles in 4 key domains: physical, emotional, creative, and spiritual. In the physical domain, track your energy levels, sleep quality, and bodily sensations. Notice patterns in when you naturally feel energized versus when you need rest. Pay attention to how these patterns might correlate with lunar cycles, seasons, or other natural rhythms. In the emotional domain, observe the natural fluctuations in your feeling states. Rather than judging these variations, simply note them with curiosity. You might discover that certain emotional patterns repeat at predictable intervals or in response to specific triggers. This awareness itself begins to transform your relationship with emotional states. For your creative or intellectual rhythm, track periods of inspiration versus integration, output versus input. Notice when ideas flow easily and when they require more effort. Pay attention to the conditions that support different phases of your creative process. In the spiritual domain, observe oscillations between clarity and questioning, connection and seeking. Notice how your sense of meaning and purpose might move through its own rhythmic patterns over time. To make this concrete, let me share how Elena, a therapist, used rhythm mapping to transform her work life. She began tracking her energy, creativity, and emotional openness throughout the month and discovered clear patterns. She realized her analytical thinking peaked during certain weeks, while her emotional intuition was strongest during others. Rather than fighting these rhythms, she reorganized her schedule, clustering research and writing projects during analytical phases, and scheduling more client sessions during intuitive phases. Not only did this increase her effectiveness, it dramatically reduced her sense of strain and self-judgment. What makes rhythm mapping particularly powerful is recognizing how these various cycles interact. Perhaps your creative energy peaks when your physical energy is moderate rather than at its height. Maybe your emotional openness correlates with certain phases of your spiritual journey. These interrelationships form your unique rhythmic signature. I recommend creating a simple tracking system, whether a journal, calendar, or digital tool, where you can note these patterns daily for at least one lunar cycle, about 29 days. While a full lunar cycle offers optimal insight into your patterns, you'll likely begin recognizing valuable rhythms within the first week of conscious observation. This time frame often reveals patterns that might otherwise remain invisible. Look for correlations not just within each domain, but across domains, creating a multidimensional map of your personal rhythms. The second practice is pendulum preparation, using your awareness of where you currently are in various cycles to prepare for inevitable shifts. This practice embodies the wisdom that each phase contains the seeds of its opposite. When you're in a period of high energy, creative flow, or emotional expansion, use this awareness to prepare for the inevitable pendulum swing toward rest, integration, or contraction. This might mean creating space in your schedule for future downtime, setting appropriate expectations with others, or simply mentally preparing for the shift. Similarly, when you're in a period of lower energy, creative gestation, or emotional processing, remember that these phases are preparing you for the return swing toward expression, connection, and expansion. Use these quieter phases purposefully, rather than resisting them or seeing them as unproductive. Remember our earlier exploration of the law of rhythmic compensation, that the measure of the swing in one direction determines the measure of the return. This principle directly informs pendulum preparation, helping you anticipate not just that shifts will occur, but their likely intensity based on current conditions. This preparation isn't about anxiously anticipating change, but about wisely honoring the full cycle. It's the recognition that the farmer who fails to prepare for winter during autumn's abundance will struggle unnecessarily when the seasons shift. In practice, pendulum preparation might look like building renewal time into your schedule after periods of intense output. It might mean gathering inspirational resources during creative flow to support you during future integration phases. It could involve deepening your self-connection during times of solitude, so that when you return to relationship, you bring a fuller presence. The key is responding to current conditions while maintaining awareness of the larger cycle. This dual attention to present reality and impending shift creates a proactive rather than reactive relationship with life's rhythms. The third practice is rhythmic alignment, adjusting your activities to match your natural energy states rather than forcing counterproductive action. This practice transforms productivity from a battle against yourself to a dance with your natural capacities. Begin by identifying the types of activities that align well with different phases of your cycles. During high-energy periods, which tasks benefit from that vitality? During reflective phases, which activities honor that introspective quality? During creative flow, where is that inspiration best channeled? Then, to the extent possible within your responsibilities, arrange your activities to align with these natural rhythms. This doesn't mean abandoning commitments when you don't feel like fulfilling them. Rather, it means bringing greater discernment to how and when you approach different types of tasks. Consider how David, an entrepreneur, transformed his business approach through rhythmic alignment. Instead of maintaining the same work schedule daily, he identified his natural cycles, recognizing that his strategic thinking was sharpest in the morning, his social energy peaked midday, and his creative problem-solving flowed best in evening hours. By restructuring his workday to match these rhythms, handling complex planning in mornings, meetings and team interactions midday, and creative development in evenings, he increased both his productivity and satisfaction while working the same number of hours. For example, you might schedule deep creative work during the times of day when your energy naturally peaks. You might save administrative tasks for transition periods. You might plan important conversations during phases when your emotional intelligence is most accessible. Even with rigid external obligations, you can apply rhythmic wisdom by adjusting how you approach tasks, breaking them into components that match your current state, or finding small windows that honor your natural timing. This practice requires both self-awareness and flexibility. The goal isn't rigid adherence to a predetermined schedule, but dynamic response to your actual state. It's about developing the discernment to know when pushing through resistance serves you, and when working with your natural rhythm would be more effective. As you practice rhythmic alignment, you'll likely discover that resistance often signals misalignment rather than laziness or incapacity. What feels like forcing yourself might actually be attempting the right action at the wrong time. This awareness allows you to distinguish between necessary discipline and counterproductive pushing. We've now covered the 3 key practices for developing rhythmic resilience. If you're already applying these practices, you're ahead of 95% of people in understanding how to work with life's natural patterns. This third practice we've explored is where the magic really happens, where theory transforms into daily flow. The beauty of rhythmic understanding is its applicability across all areas of life. Let's explore how to adapt these practices to specific domains. In health and wellness, rhythmic awareness transforms how we approach nutrition, exercise, and rest. Rather than forcing the same eating patterns or workout intensity regardless of your state, you can learn to honor your body's changing needs across different phases. During high-energy periods, your body might benefit from more intense movement and higher protein intake. During regenerative phases, gentler practices and more warming, grounding foods might better support your system. Women, in particular, can benefit from aligning exercise types with hormonal cycles, more intensity during follicular phases, more restoration during luteal phases. Sleep patterns also benefit from rhythmic awareness. Instead of expecting identical sleep needs every night, you might discover that your requirements shift in predictable patterns. Honoring these variations, rather than forcing a rigid schedule, often improves overall sleep quality and energy. In professional contexts, rhythmic awareness can significantly enhance productivity and sustainability. Rather than expecting constant output, you can learn to identify your peak performance periods for different types of tasks. Deep analytical work, creative problem-solving, routine administration, and collaborative engagement each benefit from different energetic states. When possible, schedule your workday to align these tasks with your natural rhythms. Reserve your highest clarity periods for your most complex work. Use transitional energy for administrative tasks. Schedule collaborative meetings when your social energy is naturally higher. Even in environments with less scheduling flexibility, rhythmic awareness helps you navigate your workday more effectively. You might adjust your approach to tasks based on your current state, perhaps breaking complex work into smaller steps during lower energy periods, or using different creative approaches depending on where you are in your cycle. In relationships, rhythmic understanding transforms how we interpret and respond to the natural ebbs and flows of connection. Rather than expecting constant closeness or consistent emotional availability, we can recognize and honor the breathing patterns unique to each relationship. Practically, this might mean creating regular rhythms of connection and space in your important relationships. It might involve communicating your needs for solitude without apologizing for them. It could mean developing the security to enjoy connection deeply while also honoring separation as part of a healthy relational rhythm. This perspective is particularly valuable for navigating differences in personal rhythms between partners, friends, or family members. When we understand that these differences aren't personal rejections, but natural variations in individual patterns, we can find creative ways to honor both our rhythms and those of our loved ones. In spiritual life, rhythmic understanding transforms our relationship with practice itself. Rather than expecting linear progress or consistent experiences, we can recognize the natural oscillation between clarity and confusion, between presence and seeking. This awareness might lead you to vary your practice approach based on where you are in your spiritual cycle. During periods of natural connection, your practice might focus